Hi friends, this is Chris. Welcome back to the channel, and this is your daily news. So, are you getting paid enough, and are you even getting paid at all? The reason why I mention that is because look at today's headlines. I can see here record wage growth. So just read the first part, you feel happy, and then you read the second part, feels fresh, inflation fears. So not so great. So this is the UK, and evidently wage growth is at 7.3%. And I'd love to hear from people in the UK if that's indeed the case. Are you getting paid more than say before? And also too, in the USA or other places, are you getting a wage increase of 7.3? Now, it sounds great on paper. However, you got to read everything. And it turns out, unfortunately, talking about UK here, inflation's at 8.7. So, if you're getting a 7.3 increase, it sounds great, but when you find out that prices are accelerating more than what you're getting paid. And this is something I always ask you guys is, yes, you may have gotten a raise, but is it keeping up with food, housing, fuel costs, these kind of things? So the other thing too is that even though you may, for example, have an increase this year, maybe, the last, say, 3 years, you didn't get any increases, so it hasn't kept up overall. So do always keep an eye on the full picture. That's sort of what I want you guys to get out of that. The other thing is too is that if you think it's bad in the UK, talking about inflation, evidently Egypt has a all-time high, 35.7%, which is really crazy. Anyone who's in Egypt or have any friends or family there, I'd love to hear, what's going on. And it's always very different, in the community when you ask like an actual person there and say, hey, I'm in Egypt. It is crazy. The eggs or whatever are through the roof. And it's interesting because around the world, you have different concerns. So UK, you're really, really worried about inflation. In China, it's actually kind of opposite. They're worried that consumer inflation, you can see here, rate is at 0. Basically, the country isn't growing and may go into deflationary period. And the other thing is too, many U.S. companies rely on the Chinese consumer to essentially buy their stuff. We talk about a popular company here on the channel, say Tesla. If the Chinese consumers aren't buying, right, there's no demand, it's really going to hurt those type of companies. So keep an eye on that. And moreover, which is really interesting, will Chinese people cash out of their markets? There was a fascinating article here. This will be one that there's always headlines every day in the media, but this one will probably get swept under the carpet because it's just not as interesting or sexy, but it is something you want to pay attention to. So you can read the headline here: 28 billion wave of selling pressure imperils China's stocks. The basic gist of it is that a bunch of people in China put their money in, say, mutual funds and stuff like that. And there was like a 3-year lockup period, and some of these people are, down maybe 3%, maybe down 10%, right? They haven't really made any money, and they're looking at a slowing economy, and they're like, well, I've taken a loss, and I just want to get my money out because it's just not worth it. So we're going to see how sort of the average, Chinese person thinks about, if it's worth it to invest their money in the Chinese market, these kind of things. And in some regards, I always wonder this, and I've told you guys many times on this channel, maybe this is what we're seeing why Bitcoin is still stabilizing is because people in China, or you could say people in Russia or various countries are just like, I don't trust my own, local government, and therefore I'm just throwing in Bitcoin or pumping up the American tech, these kind of things, right? So money does flow around internationally. That's why we do pinch attention to this stuff. And I've noticed an interesting trend to where on many of the American outlets, and this really CNBC in particular, seem to be pumping up the Chinese equities. So this is a different story. We're saying like Chinese people might want to get out, whereas CNBC keeps pumping China. So it could be related to where CNBC is trying to, help rich Chinese people get out of their position, but we'll see. Talking about the USA in comparison to, say, the UK, the US added 209,000 jobs, but more importantly, just for comparison's sake, I guess it's saying here wage growth is 4.4% in the USA. And again, I always pose this question to the community. When you see these kind of numbers, wage growth in UK 7.3, wage growth in US 4.4, is your particular situation, is it comparable to that, or are you struggling? The reason why I mentioned the are you struggling, because regardless of what the national numbers say, if you're, say, someone that works in Microsoft, this is a true story, it just came out, they're going to be laying off more people. So they announced back in January, that Microsoft's going to be laying off, 10,000 people. Now they're saying they're going to lay off yet more people. They didn't say exactly, how many or which people, and I'm sure they'll find out soon, unfortunately. And one thing that is kind of odd about the market, right? The market's been pumping all year. You guys know this, is that if you believe, and I say if because this is the market that we're in, if you believe that companies should trade on their fundamental value, meaning like how much money they make, then it would be odd the way that we're talking here, because essentially when companies are firing people, that would indicate to me that they're not growing anymore. That would be the general idea, right? We don't need so many people to come in because like work is slowing. The other thing too that you can be thinking about, and this would be on a more positive note, would be say, okay, well, Chris, companies are cutting jobs, they're cutting departments, et cetera, because they need to control their costs, and therefore their profits will go up. That's a concept of that, and they're going to grow profits that way. And this is what we're going to see. So when you look at earnings growth, and this is sort of when you'll know someone is pumping a bunch of BS to you or not. And I see it so much on like the more retail focused news outlets where they say companies or analysts, et cetera, will always pump to you sales and revenues growth, right? They'll say, oh my God, our sales growth is up crazy compared to last year. But understand that there is inflation, right? So the key that you want to be thinking about is not necessarily just sales growth. You want to be thinking about bottom line. Because, for example, if a company says, hey, our sales growth is 100% year over year, we are doubling our sales, but then you look at their numbers and it turns out their expenses are essentially equal with sales growth. Maybe their expenses are also doubling, then they're essentially their profits are flat. Or theoretically, if their expenses are increasing in cost compared to their sales / revenue, then their actual profits are going down. And this is why earnings reports become so important. And I want you guys to always understand when someone's pumping you something, when they're talking about sales, not talking about profits. And again, the reason why I point out these kind of stories that say something like Microsoft is, laying off people, it shows to me that like, wow, they're definitely not growing, but you can make the case that they're cutting expenses and they're going to try to maintain their profit margins that way. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on that. But yes, they are laying off yet more people. Another thing that you want to be keeping an eye on, and this is always a big one, remember companies in the USA, or the US economy, I should say, is like based on 70% consumers. So it's like a consumer-based economy. I guess Amazon's going to have their Prime Day coming up. I think it's like Tuesday and Wednesday, I want to say. So I'm not in the USA, I'm in Korea, so I don't necessarily pay attention to what the big sales are in Prime. And for you guys, you can say, hey, TVs are on sale, computers are on sale, etc. But evidently, the sort of importance of Prime to people is going down. It's not growing like it once was. So you can take a look at this. This was a really interesting thing. Now we're talking about revenue here, not profits. Just want to point that out, but you can see the difference. So back in 2017, 18, 19, and 20, you guys can see this here. They would just basically exponentially growing the amount of revenue that was generated by the Prime Day. However, 21, 22, 23, it's definitely down. So like say in 2018, like you're looking at, oh my God, Prime Day is like growing 60%, right? In revenue, not profits, but revenue. And then you had like 2020, 40%, but now we're looking at like 10% increase in 2023. So this is definitely a slowing of growth. And again, this is just revenue, but I just want to give you a sense of like, oh my God, are they able to trim costs because their revenue is certainly not growing in order to maintain profits? And that's what I want to, emphasize when you look at the stocks and the markets, stuff like that, is always be considering the bottom line. You'll know you're being pumped when they're only talking about top line and not bottom line. So that's a real big thing. Banks are going to be reporting, I believe, starting Friday. And this was a really interesting headline you can see here. Big U.S. banks to post largest rise in loan losses since the pandemic. Basically, we're looking at a bunch of bad loans that the banks have. The numbers that they were estimating, we won't know until actual earnings report coming out, but among the big banks, I guess we're talking about $5 billion in defaulted loans in the second quarter of this year. That's sort of what we're estimating according to Bloomberg. And then supposedly the banks have set aside $7.6 billion to cover said bad loans. So we'll see what those numbers shake out to be. And this is where the banking industry is like nuts. This is like how much essentially bad deals that they make all the time. And I'll say all the time. Last quarter. And I guess evidently too, the big one is, or one of the big ones is also too, you're looking at credit cards, right? How are they going to be? The charge-offs are looking at 1.1 billion. And you're also looking at commercial real estate. How many bad loans are there going to be there? And this is a fascinating thing, because then despite all these things, and you also have investment banking is probably not going to make as much. Trading revenues are going to be down. But at least according to this, they're saying, some of the analysts are saying that, yeah, bank earnings are going to increase 6% year, which is so odd, because you've got all these sort of bad indicators, but yet they're still going to make more money. So I'm curious if that is indeed the case, or this is just a bunch of hooey. But regardless, It will be reported, I guess, starting this week and going into next week. So keep an eye on those things. Moreover, which I think is interesting as well, is this was a fascinating headline. The American banking landscape is on the cusp of deciding the shift. Expect more pain to come. And there was a key thing here where one of these people, I think this was can't remember which one it was. Oh, here it is. It was analyst over at Fitch. He was saying half the country's banks will be swallowed by competitors in the next decade. So Chris Wolf is over at Fitch is basically saying, hey, there's going to be less banks in the USA in the next 10 years. And there was a fascinating chart, which, it's not crazy that we could have fewer banks going forward, because evidently, according to this, it says U.S. commercial banks, compared to the all G7 countries combined, I guess we have nearly 5,000 banks in the USA, commercial banks that is. And then you look at like UK, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, et cetera, and they have 100, 200, that kind of thing. So we clearly have a lot more banks than other places around the world. And I can tell you, I'm in Korea, and, we have a bunch of major banks. I don't say a bunch, but let's say like 5, something of that nature. And which ones they are. There's just not that many. And then USA, there's like all kinds of regional banks and small banks. And, remember that we had that whole savings and loan crisis a while ago. That was like 20 years ago, something like that. But this is a thing that I think probably is a real thing, that the bigger banks will probably buy the small banks, and we'll keep an eye on the loan situation. I also think this is also very, very real, that when interest rates are so high, right, people look at their money and okay, I want a better return on our savings deposit. And so what happens is with people, which I always think really fascinating, they start moving their money around the different banks, because you guys may not know this. Some of the really big ones, like your Bank of America or JP Morgan, et cetera, they pay nothing on their savings accounts. And then these smaller banks try to entice you with really high savings rates, right? So I think these days you can get a savings account like 4 or 5%. And I don't know if it goes to 6 or 7, but you can get pretty decent deals. Or they try to give you really good discounts on, say, a mortgage, these kind of things. But in doing so, a lot of these smaller banks sort of have sketchy books. And then you get this issue of what if, said, banks ends up scamming a lot of people, what's the government to do? What's the big banks to do? And et cetera. And so because of the way our system is, and because we have so many banks in it, it's not crazy to say that we may need to reduce said banks, because, practically speaking, I would, rather have a system of fewer banks that at least are stable. Although, to be fair, if you get too few of banks, then you have more like oligopolies, monopolies. So there is a certainly happy medium. But I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's a clear line between, do we want too many banks that are all competing, but yet they're giving you offers that are just basically unsustainable? Or do you want a system where there's fewer banks, where things are, say, more stable, but they're all controlled by just a few powers that be? So regardless, I can understand why the crypto bulls are out there saying, oh, Chris, the whole banking system is corrupt, and I don't trust any fiat currencies. Right? I mean, guys, I really get that, but it doesn't necessarily make crypto any better. And frankly, I don't trust crypto, but also too, in that regard, I don't trust the banks either. So I lived through the banking crisis of 07, 08. And so I really know how our systems really whack. So do keep an eye on this, though. And like I mentioned before, keep an eye on what the bad loans are. They're predicting 5 billion. It may or may not be more. Also, too, going on around the world, Sweden may be joining NATO. I guess Turkey was against it, but then they dropped that. And I think it was Sweden, and the other one was Finland was looking into it. I didn't see any headlines of Finland, but I would say Sweden's got a higher chance. And this is following on the heels of this really weird story with the Prigozhin and the whole, he was going to overthrow Putin kind of thing, remove Putin, and the Wagner issue. And you guys, we talked about this before. Now the headlines are saying, and I don't know what to make of this. I honestly don't. Russia confirms Wagner, Putin meeting releases Gerasimov video. So basically the gist of it is that the Russian media are reporting that days after the revolt, Prigozhin met Putin for 3 hours, and that they have another. I think I have another article here that Prigozhin pledged loyalty to Putin, and I guess this supposed 3-hour meeting took place on June 29th. I will tell you flat out, I don't trust anything that's going on over there. I saw the stories before. We talked about the channel. We're like, okay, looks like there's a revolt happening. We saw the, the tanks and the motorized vehicles, going north to Moscow. Then there was a bunch of roadblocks being put up, and so like we knew that something was happening. And then suddenly he just like stopped, and then he was supposed to go to like, was it Belarus, I think, right? And then you're like, okay, what's he doing there? And then now I guess we don't know exactly where he is. And this is my opinion. He's probably going to fall out a window somewhere. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think that he indeed pledged loyalty? Can we trust any of this stuff? And what the heck is going on? So anyway, that is our news for the day. I always appreciate your time, and I'll catch you next video.